Good morning or good afternoon, fifth graders. Today we are going to prepare your ice cream presentation for the fourth graders. So what that means is we are going to learn about the properties of salt that allow us to use it to make ice cream. And then you're going to prepare a presentation for the fourth graders. And next week you will show them your presentation. You will teach them why we can use salt to make ice cream. And then we'll all get together and actually make some ice cream and have a little celebration to celebrate the end of our year. So let's go ahead and get started with that. We're going to learn 3 different properties of salt today. That means 3 different characteristics or just things about salt. And property number 1 is going to be crystal forms. And what that means is that all salt is actually formed in the shape of crystals. Usually they look like cubes like this. So if you put salt crystals under the electron microscope, this is what you will see. And if you could see the atoms, you would actually see that they look like this. They're called chlorine atoms and sodium atoms. And so we say that there are Cl atoms, which are the green ones here, the green ones with the negative sign, and there are sodium atoms, and we actually abbreviate that Na with a little positive sign, and that's what the salt atoms look like when they're stuck together. So since property 1 is crystal forms, we are going to take your graphic organizer, and where it says property 1 here under properties of salt, I want you to go ahead and write down the word crystal forms. So go ahead and do that right now. And when you are ready, we will move on to number 2. So let's just get this out of the way. Property number 1, crystal forms of salt. The second important property of salt that we need to know about is that it dissolves in water. And what that means is when you put the salt in the water and stir it up, it actually seems to disappear. But what's actually happening, if you look in this picture here, those atoms that we talked about before in the other slide, the sodium and the sodium, the NAs, and the chlorines are breaking apart. And those atoms are going in between the molecules of water. And we know already that atoms are so small that we can't see them. So when they're broken apart and they're not stuck together anymore, they are so small that we just can't see them anymore. So it's not that the salt has disappeared into the water, but we say it's dissolved. The atoms have broken up and gone in between the water molecules. And that is, of course, property number 2. So we are going to write it down on our graphic organizer. Property 2, salt dissolves in water. Go ahead and write that down. And then let's move on quickly to property number 3. Property number 3 is what we're really interested in here today. Freezing point depression. What freezing point depression means is that when you put salt into ice water like we see here, the temperature of the ice water will go down because adding salt to water will lower the temperature at which it freezes. It makes the ice or the water freeze at a lower temperature. And in order to make ice cream, we need something that's even colder than ice to freeze the cream, the milk. Otherwise, it doesn't really freeze at all. So we need to make sure that when we're making ice cream, we don't just have salt and water together to freeze it. We need to have, we don't have ice and water together to freeze it. We need to have ice and salt and water so that that ice water gets super, super cold. So that is property number 3, freezing point depression, and we will write it down for property number 3. Freezing point depression. Alright, and at this point it's time for you to do some of your own research so that you can be experts when you get to present to the fourth graders. So here's what we're going to do now. On your table, you have a sheet that says procedure. Let's get these out of the way. the procedure, and you have tools in order to help you observe these properties of salt on your own. So you'll see, to observe property number 1, use the microscope. So that means that you right now need to get the microscope, or after the video is over, you need to get the microscope. You need to place a pinch of salt on the microscope slide and observe the salt under the microscope so that you can see for yourself the crystal shape. Then, here's the important part for your presentation. You need to write down or draw, preferably draw, what you see under your observations, and then you need to write an explanation of what is going on in this property. So something like this might look like you have your microscope point or field of view, since we always see a circle when we look under the microscope. And then you might actually draw the crystal salt that you see. You might do your best to draw a cube if you can, if that's what you see. And you might do that as many salt crystals as you can see. You might write the word crystal. You should definitely label everything in your drawing. You could maybe use better handwriting than I'm able to do right now. And then under explanation, you need to explain what you see here. So property number 1, we know, is crystal form. So what are you going to say to the 4th graders in order for them to understand this property? For example, one explanation might be that when you place salt under a microscope, you can see that it has a crystal shape. In your own words, that's what you're going to do. So that's for property number 1. After you have finished property number 1, you will go on to property number 2, and you will see that to observe property 2, you need to use the spoon. So you're going to take the spoon, and you're going to place a spoonful of salt into the beaker of water that I've given you, and you will stir until you can't see the salt anymore. And I would like for you to count the number of times you have to stir, or the number of seconds that go by, whatever you prefer, before the salt dissolves completely. So before, when you're counting the number of times it takes to go from this to this, salty to clear. And then I want you to, again, draw what you see, draw your observations under dissolves in water, and write an explanation for the 4th graders of what happened here. And then finally, when you're finished with property 2, you need to observe property 3, and you're going to use the thermometer for that. And so there are beakers of fresh ice water in the back table, and you will go ahead and ask me, you're going to observe the temperature, and then you'll ask me for the ice for the salt water, and then you're going to observe the thermometer of your salt water. So for your freezing point depression observations, you will have pictures of 2 beakers of water. One needs to be fresh water, the other needs to be salt water, and you will write down how many degrees each one has. And I'm not going to tell you what it will be because I don't know. I haven't done this experiment. It's your experiment. Alright, so you need to have both fresh water and salt water, and the how cold it is for each one. And then of course you're going to go ahead and explain what is happening here. Why is the salt water a different temperature than the fresh water? And then it's really important to make sure you do a really good job here, because you will be using all these notes to make a really nice poster for your presentation. So you right now have a few jobs. You need to observe property 1, you need to observe property 2, you need to observe property 3, you need to write your explanations for all of that, and then you need to be ready to make your poster. If you have questions, you can of course raise your hand and I will come right over. Good luck and have fun, and I will see you in a bit. Bye guys.